Ukraine says a second round of ceasefire talks with Russia has not yielded the results it hoped for, but the two sides have discussed humanitarian corridors and agreed to speak again. Key points: Russia says it had submitted its demands to Ukrainian negotiators earlier this week. Russia says it had submitted its demands to Ukrainian negotiators earlier this week. The talks discussed a possible ceasefire and the establishment of a humanitarian corridor. The talks discussed a possible ceasefire and the establishment of a humanitarian corridor. Ukraine's president said he was willing to have direct talks with Russia's Vladimir Putin to pursue peace. "To our great regret, we did not get the results we were counting on," Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said. Both sides said they wanted a possible ceasefire for evacuating civilians through humanitarian corridors. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had said prior to the meeting on Thursday that Moscow was ready for talks to end the fighting in Ukraine, but would continue to press its effort to destroy Ukraine's military infrastructure. The second round of face-to-face discussions took place on the Belarus-Poland border after initial talks on Monday ended without agreement. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said while his country was ready for talks to resume, Russia's demands had not changed and he would not accept any ultimatums. Russian officials said Moscow's demands included Ukraine's recognition of Russia's hold on Crimea, independence for the separatist-controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk, as well as demilitarization and denazification. Loading. Putin says fight against neo-Nazis going to plan. Russian President Vladimir Putin described his troops as heroes, fighting against neo-Nazis during their invasion of Ukraine in a televised address on Thursday. Mr. Putin said the Russian military had offered safe corridors to civilians to allow them to leave areas of fighting in Ukraine, but claimed Ukrainian nationalist groups were preventing them from leaving. Mr. Putin described his troops as heroes, fighting against neo-Nazis. AP, Andrei Gorshkov. He further charged that Ukrainian forces were taking thousands of foreign citizens hostage and using civilians as human shields, taking up firing positions to provoke Russian retaliatory fire. He provided no evidence for either allegation. The Russian military said it had only struck military facilities and had not targeted residential areas, a claim that has been contradicted by the abundant evidence of massive casualties and damage to residential areas of Kyiv, Kharkiv, Chernihiv and other cities in Ukraine. Mr. Putin reaffirmed his claim that the Russian military was fighting neo-Nazis, adding that some Ukrainians were also fooled by nationalist propaganda. He hailed the Russian military as heroes and ordered additional payments to families of the soldiers who were and servicemen who were wounded in action. Meanwhile, Russia continued to shell Ukrainian cities, including the capital Kyiv, while Moscow said it had taken control of the port city of Kherson. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 27 seconds 27's widespread destruction in the Ukrainian town of Borodyanka. Mr. Putin said his special military operation in Ukraine was going to plan and that all tasks set for the operation were being successfully resolved and proceeding strictly in line with the timetable. Those comments conflict with Western assessments, which have characterized the invasion as disorganized and chaotic. Earlier at a media conference, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on Mr. Putin to be involved in peace talks, saying it was the only way to stop this war. Deaths climb as fighting continues. At least 249 Ukrainian civilians have been and another 553 injured during Russia's military invasion that began a week ago, according to the latest figures from the UN Human Rights Office. Most of the casualties were caused by the use of explosive weapons with a wide impact area, including shelling from heavy artillery and multi-launch rocket systems, and air strikes, the UN office said. Russia's defense ministry on Wednesday said 498 Russian soldiers had died and another 1,597 had been wounded since the start of the invasion, the first time Moscow put a figure on its casualties. Ukraine said almost 9,000 Russian soldiers had been so far has not reported its own military losses. It said 2,000 Ukrainian civilians had so far died. Kyiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, continues to come under heavy shelling. AP, Andrew Marienko reports that Kherson seized by Russia. Russian forces have stepped up their assaults on urban areas in recent days, with heavy shelling hitting the country's second-largest city, Kyiv, and two strategic seaports. The West believes Russia's advancement into Ukraine has stalled due to logistical problems, with its main assault force stuck for days on a highway north of Kyiv, and other advances halted at the outskirts of cities it is bombing. Despite an initial battle plan that Western countries said was aimed at swiftly toppling the Kyiv government, it appears Russia has captured only one Ukrainian city so far, the southern Dnipro River port of Kherson, which its tanks entered on Wednesday. Kherson Regional Governor Henady Laguta said Russian forces had occupied the regional administration building in the southern Ukrainian city. Mayor Igor Kolokhayev said he had asked the Russians who entered City Hall not to shoot people. If Kherson has fallen to Russian troops, it will become the first major Ukrainian city to do so, though a senior U.S. defense official said on Thursday they did not believe Russian forces had yet taken over the city. The official said it could be part of a strategy for potentially moving to Mykolaiv and then on to Odessa. This comes as reports from Kherson said Russian troops were appearing to roll toward Mykolaiv, another major Black Sea port and shipbuilding center to the west. The regional governor, Vitaly Kim, said big convoys of Russian troops were advancing on the city. Heavy fighting continued on the outskirts of another strategic port, Mariupol, on the Azov Sea, plunging it into darkness, isolation and fear. Electricity and phone service were largely down, and homes and shops faced food and water shortages. Cutting Ukraine's access to its Black Sea and Azov coast would deal a crippling blow to the country's economy and allow Russia to build a land corridor stretching from its border across Crimea, which has been occupied by Russia since 2014, and all the way west to Romania. In the past days, Russian commanders have been intensifying their bombardment of urban areas. AP, Vadim Gerda. The governor of Ukraine's Chernihiv region on Thursday reported at least 9 people had been and 4 wounded after a Russian air strike hit 2 schools and private houses. Rescue work is ongoing. According to the state emergency services, there are for now 9 people and 4 wounded, he said. The death toll in Chernihiv was later revised upwards to 22 people, with rescuers searching debris for more casualties. Loading. Meanwhile, Ukrainian media reports said Russian troops had entered the southern city of Enerhoda, a major energy hub on the Dnieper River that accounts for about 1/4 of the country's power generation. It is the site of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, the biggest in Europe. Russian troops were trying to break through a barricade to the plant erected by local residents and territorial defense forces, Ukrainian Interior Ministry advisor Anton Herashchenko said in an online post. Another advisor, Vadim Denisenko, said the situation was alarming, with Russians entering Enerhoda town where the plant's workers live. Russia has already captured the defunct Chernobyl plant, some 100 kilometers north of Ukraine's capital Kyiv. Ukraine's capital under control. In his latest defiant videotaped address, Mr. Zelensky called on Ukrainians to keep up the resistance. He vowed that the invaders would have not one quiet moment, and described Russian soldiers as confused children who have been used. Mr. Zelensky said Ukraine and Russia could find a way out of the war if the Kremlin treated Ukraine on an equal footing and came to talks with a will to negotiate in good faith, during a televised interview on Thursday. There are things in which some compromises must be found so that people do not die, but there are things in which there are no compromises, he said. He also said he was willing to have an open conversation with Mr. Putin. In the capital Kyiv, thousands of residents have continued sheltering in metro stations, away from Russian missile and rocket attacks. Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, said the situation in Ukraine's capital was difficult but under control. He said there were no casualties overnight and that nighttime explosions were Ukrainian air defenses striking down incoming Russian missiles. More than 1 million people have fled the fighting.